All right. Welcome to another Strange Normal. We're going to talk a little bit about tonight Lou Elizondo's new book. As I promised in the last episode, we have run through 10 hours of Lou's book, several hours of Joe Rogan's podcast with him on it. And man, News Nation has had him on there over and over again, at least for an hour episode. So we've gone through several hours of this stuff, trying to understand what in the world is going on here. And I think it's a good time to review what in the world is happening. Who is this guy, Lou Elizondo? This guy that started this whole thing, at least from our perspective, the channel's perspective. It's been going on a lot further than that. But this is going to be quite a story. Stay tuned.
I don't care if you think I'm Satan reincarnated.
There's a whole fleet of them. What's on the SA? Oh my gosh.
Demon spirits will declare themselves to be inhabitants of 5 distant planets in the galaxies that are coming to warn the inhabitants of planet Earth of the impending destruction of the planet.
It is now 90 seconds to midnight.
I still think these are what people call angels. I'm dying to know what they've got to say.
Pretty severe suffering brings them.
These entities have the ability to appear in any form.
Strange Normal. My name is Bradley. We talk about the stranger things that happen in your normal life, give you a biblical understanding of what is going on. And there is a lot going on. And every week there seems to be a lot going on. But truly, this thing just keeps ramping up further and further. And I believe it's going to keep ramping up in the next year, especially. In the next year after that, especially. And in the next year after that. And if we're here still, we'll see if we can continue following this craziness that is happening and keeping you up to date with the latest. Not only the latest on what is happening in your strange normal life, but also biblically, because we are a Christian podcast and we talk about and understand this from a Christian perspective. So let me dive into that a little bit, because we've had lots of influx of friends that have joined us just recently, subscribers. And if you're not a subscriber, hit the subscribe button so I know to catch you up on what's happening here. We know that there's going to be a big spiritualism, huge spiritualism that's going to happen at the end of time. Revelation 13 tells us that. And so what we're doing is following this spiritualism that's going to become more of a worship type spiritualism as things go on according to the Bible. And we're noticing that the things that align with this spiritualism turn out surprising to me, surprising to I think a number of you guys too, surprisingly to this UFO phenomenon that has been the weird part of society for a long time. And because of a number of things, how it's aligned with spirits of the dead that appear to these people when they have these encounters, how lots of these things have connections to last day events that seem to be happening. We have lots of nuclear things tied to this thing right now, and I think it's very, very interesting. So we're carefully following this, looking at it through a biblical perspective. There was also a man named Roger Murnau who talked a little bit about this just in a short couple sentences, saying that this is going to be a big event that's going to happen, and people are going to eat this stuff. I mean, people are just going to eat this stuff. Why? Because of what has been happening in the media, in movies, we've been pushing this agenda, this idea, this cultural idea that we need to reach out to something beyond us, and in an unchristian type of way. And so this is the propaganda that has been pressed into our minds, maybe not purposefully by physical people, but by the spiritual realm that has influenced the writers and the producers of Hollywood media. So we look at it through this perspective and go, step back, look at this. Perhaps there's something legitimate going on with this UFO phenomenon, whether it be, and what are the connections between this and the Bible, and what are people saying about it? And watch how this stuff progresses, because we know it's going to become a major disclosure here pretty soon, if everything lines up according to how people have said in the occult books, in the former occultist Christian Roger Murnau, how everyone has said things are going to happen. So that's the point of this channel. That's what we're getting at here, really, if you think about it. But first, I want to dive into something. Someone sent me something just today, and they said, you know, that the U.S. is actually preparing for nuclear war. Why is that significant? We've long theorized that the U.S. is kind of preparing for this. We know that other countries are as well. But what I think is interesting that they finally said it in media is that these things have long said through their experiencers, through different people have had visions of what they think is going on, which turns out to be the narrative, that things are going to start happening once lots of people start dying. Major catastrophes start happening. And we're told about those catastrophes in the last books of the Bible. And so I think it's interesting to kind of piece this together and see how prophecy is fulfilling in our lifetime and give you some form of legitimacy to the Bible. I mean, sometimes we sit in the pews in church, I've done it too, and we think, man, this stuff applies to me, but it's been generations and generations and generations of constant sitting and listening to the same stuff. Jesus loves you, we all know that. But Christ is coming soon. And I don't think many, even that sit in the pews of your church, realize that. This channel realizes that, and that's why we're doing this. So hit that subscribe button, hit that like button if you like things like this, and let's get started, because we got an hour worth of content to go through. And that's why I don't have a guest tonight, because I'm going to stop talking and just roll the footage. But first, let's get into that news clip about nuclear war real quick. I think that's important to kind of get through. Okay, let's go. No. I'm not starting the intro again. Here, let's do this.
Is Joe Biden ready to go nuclear on China? According to a report in the New York Times, the American president has approved a highly classified nuclear strategic plan. But here's the big catch. It focuses on China's rapid expansion of its nuclear arsenal. Pentagon believes China's nuclear stockpiles will rival the size and range of the US and Russia over the next decade. But it's not just about China. The US is preparing for a possible coordinated nuclear challenge from China, Russia, and North Korea. In the past, the likelihood that US's enemies could come together and outmaneuver the American nuclear arsenal seemed remote. But the emerging partnership between Russia and China and the arms North Korea and Iran are providing to Russia for the war in Ukraine have changed Washington's thinking. Russia and China are conducting military exercises together. There are reports that Russia is aiding North Korea and Iran's missile programs in return. Under President Xi Jinping, China has accelerated its nuclear expansion at a rapid pace. The Pentagon estimates that China's nuclear force will expand to 1,000 by 2030 and 1,500 by 2035. That is roughly the numbers that the US and Russia deploy right now. In fact, Beijing appears ahead of that schedule and has reportedly begun loading nuclear missiles into new silo fields. The other point of concern for the US is that China has halted a short-lived conversation about improving nuclear safety and security. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has had no qualms in flaunting his nuclear weapons, which are now believed to be more than 60 in number. North Korea also issued a fresh nuclear warning after US begun its annual joint military drills with South Korea. This year's exercises focus on improving their capabilities to deal with growing threats posed by North Korea. But Pyongyang said these defensive exercises resemble the historical behavior of countries preparing for conflict and accused the US and South Korea of rehearsing a beheading operation against the Kim Jong-un regime. The global nuclear landscape will be a big concern for whoever is sworn in on January 20th as the new American president. Trump or Harris will confront a changed and far more volatile nuclear landscape than the one that existed just about 3 years ago. Russian President Vladimir Putin has repeatedly threatened to use nuclear weapons against Ukraine. The Middle East is already on edge as the war in Gaza is nearing a year and there is a growing threat of a wider regional conflict. North Korea has doubled down on its nuclear program, and China's nuclear complex is now the fastest growing in the entire world.
Very interesting. So things approach closer and closer to the end. I think we're going to see more and more of this. But I believe we're probably going to see something like this happen soon. If these things want to, and what they've said in their to a lot of different experiencers, is that once something like this happens, we're going to take the matches away from you. Oh man, they've always wanted to play God, and that's what they're trying to do. So as we continue to monitor this, we'll set this aside just for a second. We're going to dig into Lou Elizondo. Lou Elizondo is one of the Pentagon officials that left the Pentagon because he said my superiors were Christian, and they were squashing the idea of not talking to these things. He says my crew was leading the ambition of trying to reach out, trying to find these things, and he reveals in this in his new book that he was also what do you call the person? A remote viewer, someone who had been trained to meditate, and what he felt was his sixth sense of seeing what couldn't be seen. I believe that that's more likely seeing through the eyes of something very demonic and very dangerous, because it's not always correct. And so if it was us, you think it would be correct. But I'm getting ahead of myself, so let's just get right into the story. Let's put some history into Lou and see who he was, because I think that's really important before we see what he says. Here we go.
Ross, we're not alone. We are not alone in this universe, and it is a simple fact. And the U.S. government has been aware of that fact now for decades.
The American public, the entire planet, is being lied to by the American government about what's really going on.
I think if the American public knew just how deep this lie went, that we would have a very significant constitutional crisis on our hands.
To make sense of the man and his claims, you need to go back to when it all started. That was 2009, when Elizondo was working as an intelligence operations specialist for the Department of Defense. He'd risen to the coveted GS-15 pay scale, the highest level federal employees can attain.
Remember, I was a senior GS-15 at the time, which is, pretty senior.
What's more, he'd set up a comfortable life in Kent Island, Maryland, with his wife Jen and their 2 daughters.
We had a really nice place to live. This was a great place to raise our kids, and it was just a really laid-back area to grow up, to raise a family and to live here.
But Elizondo says it all changed after he met this man, a renowned missile systems expert named Jim Lakatsky. He was running a program called OSAP.
He was running a program called OSAP, correct.
Which I have to read the acronym. It's the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Application Program. But you learned soon that what OSAP was investigating was not just advanced weaponry.
Yeah, I remember distinctly Jim pulling me into his office. He said, just bluntly, he said, "What do you think about UFOs?" And so I responded truthfully. I said, "I don't." I wasn't interested particularly as a kid into science fiction. I wasn't a big Star Trek fan or Star Wars fan. So I consider myself kind of a gumshoe investigator, old school, just the facts, ma'am kind of guy. And he said, that's fair, but he said, make sure that you don't let your analytic bias get the best of you, and you have to remain open-minded.
He basically told you UFOs, unidentified anomalous phenomena, UAPs, are real.
Yeah, so Jim told me, point blank, that they were studying and collecting information on UFOs.
All right, I'm going to pause it right there just for a second. Unfortunately, I can't bring it back to myself while we're in play, otherwise I'll lose my spot. But remember the name Jim Lukaski. Lukaski, I don't know if I can say it correctly. But he is the scientist working on this, and he's going to be the one who starts to realize that this is something to do with demons and all this, probably the truth behind it. I'm not sure. He also wrote the book Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, which I haven't read, and I don't know if I recommend it yet. But it's interesting because he goes through some major trouble in the Pentagon here pretty soon. Let's continue the story.
Elizondo claims he was invited to join a program under the ORSAP umbrella called ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. And soon that invitation became an initiation.
Oh, it was a bit of like Alice in Wonderland going down the rabbit hole. And it kept getting deeper and deeper.
Elizondo says his first real epiphany came during a meeting with a Brazilian Air Force general who'd come to brief them on a series of incidents in a city called Colares. Tell me what was happening.
These people, the townspeople, were being plagued by UFOs. In some cases, they were being pursued, and reports of these laser beam type, if you will, emissions were coming down and harming people to the point where the Brazilian government actually deployed doctors and the military to investigate. And then when they arrived, they substantiated. They encountered these UFOs, these UAP as well.
But Lou, I know the report of Colares. Officially, according to the Brazilian government, Colares didn't find any evidence at all.
Yeah. Well, that was not the case. And it was very clear that it was a very legitimate investigation. And what they found was that these things were coming in and out of the area and harming people.
As Lou went further down the rabbit hole, he says he learned that many of the classic UFO cases were, in fact, much more than legends, including the famous incident in Roswell, New Mexico. Roswell, 1947. What happened?
There was a UAP that crashed. In fact, there were two UAP that crashed, and one flew away while the other one did not, and it was recovered by the U.S. government.
You must appreciate people watching this, hearing you talking about aliens, recovered craft, recovered bodies. It sounds crazy.
Well, as I've said before, I'm not saying it doesn't sound crazy. What I'm saying is it's real. Well,
all right, pause it right there just for a second. Interesting. So he's seeing all this stuff and he's going, okay, I've been introduced into the program. I'm going to look into this further, and it's part of my job description. I'm not exactly sure what's going on here, but I'm gonna dig further. I'm gonna skip a part because I gotta say it faster and he's gonna be able to say it for time. But we're gonna dig into it further in another episode because I got something major coming up here in the next episode. So make sure you hit that subscribe button and the like. There's like 33 likes and there's more than 100 people watching. Hit that like button, and it really does help bring in more people in live stream. But anyway. What's going on here is that once he was introduced into this program, they said, well, we need to train you to do remote viewing as well. And so he was trained to do this remote viewing stuff, which is basically meditation, transcendental meditation, and putting yourself into a state. And he said, twisting the knobs with his fingers, basically putting your fingers into that state. You know the whole drill. It's all Eastern meditation and Eastern religion. And then emptying yourself and waiting to see what you see or what you hear or what you smell. And so he was trained to do that. He says it was remarkable because the whole entire Pentagon was against doing this, but all of a sudden they said they started receiving it actually started working. They were able to locate jets. They were able to locate things that the other governments were not able to do, and they were able to do it really well. And they said that we began doing this and found a lot of stuff. Well, of course they did. It's all spiritualism, and they didn't care about how it worked. They just wanted it to work. And it's actually very dangerous because of what happens next. Because of all that he was involved in, because of all that meditation, all that let's contact these things and get them to talk to us, this started happening.
You would have these weird glowing balls of light in the house. They were green, they were small, they were diffuse, kind of like a little neon ball, and it really caused some disruption for my kids and my wife.
What were you seeing?
I would routinely see orbs.
What do you mean by orbs?
Small, little, spherical, green, lightish green type of color. And I'd be just walking down the hall, and I would just stop, and it would just continue to go right through the wall.
So we're talking about the hitchhiker effect. Something had followed Lou home from work.
Or by his very nature, yes.
How did he explain things? Was he able to talk about what was going on?
Not well.
I could imagine you were pretty angry.
I was very upset. The house had been turned upside down.
Yes, it sounds like the stuff of madness, tall tales, delusions. And anyway, where was the proof for any of this? But before Elizondo was through, the world would see it on video.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh.
So it's going to go into further detail on this, but maybe later, because I got an hour's worth of content, and I can't just sit here and listen to the entire thing. Folks, if you consider yourself a scholar, if you consider yourself that you know your Bible well, and you think that this is an important thing, I go listen to his audiobook. It just came out this week. It's very interesting. It has a lot of interesting things, and I can't even include everything on here. It has probably 8 episodes worth of stuff for this channel. I recommend it only for someone that knows their Bible well, because then you can understand the differences between what he's saying that's truth and what he's saying that's error. And even that, I'm very, very careful about recommending. But it is an interesting book, and it doesn't include all this chaos. It comes at it from a very, okay, this is what my life was, and this is what happened. Mostly, I'd say about 90% of the time. He does go into some conjecture a little bit, but it's few and far between. So I'm not recommending it, but I think that if you're interested in this, it's actually a pretty interesting book. I read all 10 hours this week. It was actually very interesting. Let's go further, deeper into this, though, because something happened. Actually, let's get into the book. I'm going to give you clips from the book. This is Lou Elizondo's book called Imminent. He's going to talk a little bit about the attacks. He says these things are not just kind and holy entities. Something else is going on here. I think he's rightly expressing this. Watch this.
Well, we would have these weird glowing balls of light.
One of the most common types of UAP that are often reported is what we call orbs, which are small luminous balls of light or, in some cases, smooth and metallic spheres. This is nothing new. In World War II, orbs were reported regularly in and around Allied and Axis aircraft, so much so that they were nicknamed Foo Fighters. Of course, not to be confused with a talented band led by Dave Grohl, which made their mark on history much later. But even before that, indigenous people here in the United States have reported orbs going back centuries. In fact, in the Ohio River Valley, they reported orbs, luminous balls coming out of the river. I was shocked by the frequency of how often these orbs have been reported, whether by commercial pilots or military pilots or by eyewitnesses on the ground, particularly around military test ranges and sensitive U.S. military facilities. I never had any interaction with orbs until I started working with the program. I was shocked to find that a lot of my colleagues and I began experiencing firsthand some of these orbs at our homes. In fact, my wife was a complete skeptic on all this. That is, until she saw an orb in our house for herself. We had a long main hallway in the house, and one evening, a green glowing ball, probably about the size of a basketball with soft edges that weren't really well defined, floated down slowly from the kitchen to our bedroom door just below ceiling height, then disappeared into the wall. Hoping Jen caught a glimpse of it, I turned to her, catching the perplexed look on her face. She indeed saw it. The entire 10 seconds it was in our house. Another time, the kids reported seeing an orb appear in the air, hover near them for a few seconds, and then float away. They described what they had seen the best they could, first to my wife and again to me when I asked. Their description made my blood run cold. The object had been three-dimensional but still translucent and suffused with an eerie green light. The object behaved as if guided by some intelligence. It parked itself in the air, then drifted off down the hall before disappearing entirely. What the hell was going on? Were these things probes sent to scope out my house? Was this some sort of adversarial technology being used to conduct surveillance against my family and me? Or worse, was this all part of the UAP issue? Maybe another advanced intelligence was looking into me and my colleagues because they knew we were looking into them. Or did it all presage something more sinister? UAP flew over Bielo Air Force Base in the former Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. Seconds later, the launch sequence for the base's missiles were switched on without any human ever entering the launch codes. Operators frantically rushed to shut the system down, but could not. When the launch sequence reached its very last rung, it shut down on its own accord. We know that this happened. On more than one occasion, the U.S. dispatched bombers in anticipation of a nuclear attack by the Soviet Union before the U.S. realized that UAP had caused the Soviets to ready their missiles in error. Those nuclear missiles activated were pointed at us. That's how close we've come to disaster. On other occasions, UAP have taken U.S. nuclear weapons offline so we couldn't launch if the president had given the order. Life as we know it would be over if any of these events led to nuclear war. All because of the actions of UAP, which so many people are foolishly inclined to believe are harmless. At first blush, a UAP shutting off a nuclear missile does indeed sound like the work of benevolent beings who wanted to teach us a lesson. Adults taking matches out of the hands of children, some say. That's a nice and hopeful thought, but reality has proven us incorrect. At no time have UAP stopped our nuclear ambitions. As examples, they did not stop us from dropping atomic bombs on Japan. UAP did not stop us from making the leap from atomic to nuclear weapons. UAP did not stop the disasters at 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, or Fukushima. UAP did not stop the proliferation of nuclear technology from getting into the hands of more nations. Most recently, UAP have not interfered with North Korea, Indian, or Pakistani nuclear testing. And switching on nuclear missiles? That is not so benevolent. Coincidentally, every time a nuclear reactor has melted down or a catastrophe has occurred, witnesses spotted UAP in the vicinity for days or months after. 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, and Fukushima were all UAP magnets. What's the connection between UAP and nuclear technology? I asked my other colleagues. They shrugged. It was one of the eternal UAP mysteries. Were aliens paying attention to these sites because our testing of nuclear technology had perhaps caused their aircraft to crash? Were these highly evolved visitors genuinely concerned that humans would annihilate themselves and ruin the planet? Did they simply want their toys back? Do they somehow draw power from these sites? We have no clue, I was told back in 2009. Then, there was the weird connection to water.
Let's just pause it right there. The weird connection to water is they see these things more in the water. They don't see them come from outer space because they are paying attention to the U.S. has a network of satellites that pay attention to high bursts of energy, and they want to make sure there's no ICBMs or intercontinental ballistic missiles coming at the nation, and so they pay attention when they see something bright. Well, they see these bright orbs come out and go through the from the water and then go into different places on Earth, and they think, well, that doesn't have the signature of a ICBM. What was that? We see these things coming from the planet. I mean, it really is lining up here to be not aliens, but yet they still call them aliens. I think there's a huge part of the government that really recognize that these things are not aliens, not ET. This is not extraterrestrial. If anything, it's terrestrial. And a lot of people that are spiritual understand what these things are. We're going to get into that. And because he's going to reveal that here in just a second. It's called the Collins Elite. And whoever came up with that name, I haven't gotten into that part yet. But they decided that they were going to create what's called a honeypot. Now, I am from the IT sector. I grew up in information technology. I have my bachelor's of science in a computer science. And so honeypot is a well-known term for me because it wants to catch the bad guy by making something that looks like something that a bad guy would want, and then you spring a trap. So they're going to make a honeypot, or going to try to make a honeypot for these things, and listen to what they discover happens because of what they try to do. It's really interesting. Watch.
UAP flew over Bielo Air Force Base in the former Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. Seconds later, the launch sequence for the base's missiles were switched on.
We do know that there is a very significant interest that UAP have towards our nuclear technology.
A daunting thought, to be sure. But Elizondo says ATIP also developed a hypothesis that the UAPs might have an Achilles heel, a vulnerability that the American military can exploit. Electromagnetic pulses of some kind could bring down these craft.
Yeah, the general consensus was that these vehicles, their propulsion units, are susceptible to electromagnetic pulse, meaning they are using a technology that the electromagnetism, if they were to encounter a certain frequency of electromagnetism, would interfere with their ability to fly and maneuver.
Building on that hypothesis, Elizondo says his team devised an audacious secret plan to disable and capture one of those Tic Tacs.
We had proposed a honey trap to try to collect data and information on these UAP.
So this was an operation known as Interloper.
That is correct. So you have a nuclear-powered carrier with other nuclear-powered vessels, potentially nuclear-powered submarines, which also may have potentially nuclear weapons. So the idea is to create a nuclear footprint that is so irresistible to these things. We would create a trap, and then that trap would be sprung.
But Operation Interloper never made it past the planning phase. Interloper was stymied, wasn't it? It was scrapped.
It was scrapped.
It was a pretty good idea.
And it was approved by a lot of people and a lot of agencies.
And yet, when it finally got to the top, it was stopped. It was blocked. It's almost like somebody perhaps already knew the answer.
Or didn't want us having the answer.
Elizondo says the shelving of Operation Interloper was just one of several puzzling and frustrating setbacks to ATIP's mission. And eventually he came to believe it was more than just bureaucratic inefficiency. Someone was trying to block his team from making progress.
We began to run into some fierce resistance. And the more we continued to investigate, the increased level of that resistance became. There were elements, the only way I can describe them as religious fundamentalists.
It's a group that is euphemistically dubbed as the Collins Elite, isn't it?
It is.
The Collins Elite has long been rumoured to be a cabal of religious fanatics within the Pentagon. Many consider them a myth. Elizondo thinks otherwise.
That group is alive and well. It exists. I encountered elements of that group firsthand.
And they're gatekeepers inside the Pentagon who don't want the UAP story investigated.
That is correct, Ross. There are religious fundamentalists inside the Pentagon and inside the U.S. government, and specifically the intelligence community, that have a very, how shall I say, strict interpretation of their philosophical belief system.
Elizondo recounts one specific encounter with a high-ranking member of this so-called Collins Elite.
He stopped me in the halls at the Pentagon. He said, "Have you read your Bible lately?" And I was kind of surprised by the question. Like, I mean, I know what the Bible says. What may I ask specifically? What do you mean? He says, "And you know what we're dealing with are demons. These are demonic beings, and we shouldn't be looking at them."
Man, this is such a great episode for if you're just joining the channel. And I appreciate everyone that has just joined in. We've got about 1,500 new subscribers to the channel just recently. And if you're one of them, please leave me a comment, because I hope this episode is helpful to you, because this is kind of the beginning, if you haven't seen Starfall, of where this whole thing started, starfallmovie.com. It's a 3-year-old documentary I made when I first started researching this, just after the ouchie Fauci stabby wabby thing that happened that I can't say on the air because they'll tag my YouTube video. And so what I think is interesting about this whole thing is that that he had this experience with what he realized was a group of people that was guiding the direction of the Pentagon by their beliefs. I have I'm glad and I'm unhappy about that too, because I do believe that we need to definitely keep religious things separate. But how is that even possible? Because we all are led by our own understanding, our own worldview, as you should say, and so he's being led by his worldview, Lou Elizondo, and these Collins elite, if you want to call them that, or people that are Christian like me, I'm led by mine too. And if I was in a leadership position, I would say, hey, yeah, I don't want to talk these things either. They bear the resemblance. They have the characteristics of demonic activity. I don't know if they bear the resemblance of it, but they definitely have the characteristics of it. And so I think that what they were doing was correct. And he has the whole narrative saying these things are not necessarily good. We're going to get further into that. And listen to what he says about some poor dogs that these things encounter. You want to keep listening for this stuff. But we're going to get into that a little bit later down the road here as we learn the characteristics of these things. Let's learn a little bit more about the Collins elite from his actual book. Watch this. Hopefully it'll go right to it this time and won't go to the previous comment.
We do know that there is a very significant interest that UAP have toward.
It was inevitable that we'd end up on a collision course with powerful leaders in government whose worldviews bumped up against what we were investigating. As long as I'd worked the UAP issue, I'd heard stories of powerful circles of religious fundamentalists who shaped policy within the Department of Defense. They were referred to as the Collins elite. I heard the name bandied about, but honestly, I never gave their existence much credence. It was like hearing stories about the long-reaching power of the Illuminati. A secret religious society? In the Pentagon? It sounded absurd. Wasn't the day-to-day bureaucracy and existence of the legacy program bad enough? To entertain the notion that some generals and their staff of zealots actively promoted a religious agenda which drove policy inside a sacred yet secular national security institution was simply a bridge too far. Yet, I learned that the Collins elite were indeed real. But who were they? And what was their agenda? Were they some sort of formal but secret order within the U.S. government that had been part of the institution from its beginnings? Perhaps it was a rogue Masonic lodge that had managed to co-opt senior members of our military. It certainly made me think of the idea of the Illuminati. The more I thought about it, the more paranoid I became and the more conspiratorial it all seemed. I could not have pointed out a member if they passed me in the cafeteria. Later, I learned that several of the group's members were former colleagues and even a former supervisor of mine. For now, they remained elusive. Their ability to operate in complete anonymity was their strength. They were single-minded, Pentagon and intelligence community lifers with the power to shape policy and kill programs simply with a whisper or a nod. Every action they took was motivated by their religious beliefs. How could this be possible in the United States? Obviously, there should not be a religious-based group in the DoD and IC making decisions based on their theological beliefs. At the time, I considered myself spiritual, though I did not practice any particular religion. I didn't want my beliefs to interfere or intrude on my ability to investigate. I had spent much of my career trying to protect civilians and American military personnel at home and abroad from the dangers posed by radical fundamentalists. To find the same sort of rigid mindset shaping policy in the U.S. disheartened me, to say the least. Harry Reid and his cohort of fellow senators who had supported funding OSAP ATIP appreciated the concept of applying science and intellect to the UAP problem, a completely secular view that I heartily embraced. In all the work I'd done in the service, I followed the facts. To make decisions any other way seemed illogical, short-sighted, and archaic. On the battlefield, we understood that the AK-47s pointed at us were part of a radical holy war, a jihad. I never took it personally. In the halls of the Pentagon, instead of radical Islam, we had radical Christianity, and instead of an AK-47 pointed at me, it was a briefcase and a pen, which was far more terrifying and personal. Between the Collins elite and the legacy program, we had two powerful forces that didn't want us doing what we were doing. Both had more resources and both had differing objectives. One group wanted to kill all efforts to investigate the topic, one wanted to investigate it while keeping the public and us in the dark. Both operated in complete secrecy. Earlier, I mentioned a distinguished leader I'm referring to as Devin Woods, who had assumed a senior role at DIA. I knew him well and regarded him as smart, calm, cool, and collected. Woods had been my unofficial mentor when I first came to the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, ODNI. He had an illustrious career with the CIA before coming on board ODNI.
Okay, listen to what he says about this, because he names every single official in the Pentagon except for Woods. Woods has a different name. It's not actually, he's given him an alias because he's going to say some things that are very interesting. But listen to the characteristics of Woods, and then listen to what happens.
One day, while attending a routine briefing on information technology IT security practices, a junior-level officer said a few things during the training that I'd characterize as less than professional. She did not know who Woods was, so when he tried to correct her, he was met with a snide and disrespectful retort. Normally, this would have resulted in immediate administrative actions against the young officer. But Woods was different. Patient and thoughtful. Rather than tearing into the new officer and embarrassing her in front of the other officers, Woods collected his thoughts, took a deep breath, and then explained to the young officer the error of her ways in a kind and compassionate way. At no time did he pull rank or assert his authority. He exuded grace and class when he didn't have to. This was the measure of a good leader. I learned over the years that if your supervisor has to tell you they are a leader, they aren't much of a leader at all. Unfortunately, Woods did not get along with my current boss over at DoD, Lieutenant General James Clapper, who at the time was the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. Clapper had the pedigree of Tiberius, a true warrior and a scholar. I looked up to both Woods and Clapper. Both were great men deserving respect and admiration. I was once in a meeting with Clapper when his assistant walked in. "Sir, you have a call waiting for you," she said. A man of business, Clapper told his assistant to take a message. "Sir, it's Obama," she said. Clapper stepped out to take the president's call. When he returned to the room, he said to us, "How do you all feel about me being the next Director of National Intelligence?" And just like that, he was. I was happy for my boss. This was a big win for America. Having come from ODNI myself, I realized our vast intelligence infrastructure desperately needed a person of his competence, and there was no one more competent than Jim at the time.
So I'm including all this, and I know it's long-winded because I want to hear it from his words himself. I'm going to show you a chart of actually what happens here, because this is kind of important, because it's a part of the story that he hasn't told before that was a little more detailed about seeing Christians in the Pentagon. So it's about halfway through it, and then I'm going to show you the chart. But 'cause it's kind of written for people in the Pentagon, because regular people like you and me don't know all these different departments and terms and all this stuff, and it really took me about an hour to peruse over this stuff and find different directors, and I'll tell you about that in a second, but keep listening.
Unfortunately, that meant Woods would likely be forced to retire from ODNI, given the two gentlemen didn't always see eye to eye. When I next heard that Woods had accepted the position of Deputy Director of DIA, I took this to be a consolation prize of sorts. Clapper was generous and professional, as always. Rather than oust an old rival, Clapper recognized Wood's worth and offered him a key role. My optimism was short-lived, however. Within 30 to 40 days of my mentor's reassignment to DIA, the atmosphere at the agency changed with respect to our work. Woods brought in colleagues from the CIA. Suddenly, the response to Lekatsky's well-crafted reports to higher-ups elicited a shift in tone.
Now remember, Jim Lekatsky, I think his name was, he's the guy who was very, very interested in this stuff, and he was a scientist trying to understand the whole thing. He was understanding it correctly. And when Christians got into position, specifically Woods, we'll find out he's Christian in a second, it was cast down, which really, really bummed him out because he thought he was on to something. Keep listening.
As I mentioned earlier, we're only a month before higher-ups accepted these reports with eager interest. Suddenly they asked, why are we doing this? Jay and I both sensed a vibe that Jim did not. He was probably too much of an optimist to perceive the hyenas and wolves circling him. His career was on the line. I remember a meeting in fall of 2009 that Jay and I attended with Jim, in which we openly talked about the wisdom of Jim dropping the investigations OSAP had gotten involved with that many considered to be dealing with the paranormal and instead focusing solely on UAP threats. I was convinced that if we produced some solid work under the ATIP banner, there wasn't a person in the Pentagon or Congress who could look away, and it would help Jim's efforts. We had found plenty of evidence of extremely advanced craft performing in ways we couldn't replicate and entering controlled U.S. airspace at home and abroad without any repercussions. These facts alone warranted additional DoD resources. Jim refused to lose focus on the overall scope of OSAP ATIP as he felt it was all interrelated. He felt that if he could show DIA and DoD leadership the results of his efforts, any rational individual would see the value of continuing his anomalous investigations. The only problem? The briefing Jim wanted to share with leadership included words like archangels, angels, demons, and spiritual realm.
Boom.
A bridge or two, too far for most. I urged Jim to tone down the paranormal verbiage and focus instead on the importance of this work to U.S. national security. Our UAP investigations made us aware of a very real national security threat, and that was what I felt we had to focus on if we wanted people to pay attention. Lou, it's the truth, Jim said, his voice sounding increasingly frustrated. What's wrong with telling the truth? He had a point. There should never be anything wrong with telling the truth. But in this case, it's how you tell the truth that matters. Jim made a few adjustments to the slides, and we moved on. I felt bad for Jim. The program was his baby, and now people were trying to kill it. Jim believed with all his core that research on Skinwalker Ranch was worth pursuing. Privately, I agreed. Unfortunately, the current atmosphere within DIA was now hostile to that work, and if we were going to have any chance of success, we needed to adjust our message. Sometime after that, in the spring of 2010, Jim confided in me that he was being pressured to stop all efforts. He was about to take a meeting with Deputy Secretary of Defense William J. Lynn, hoping he could talk some sense into the Deputy Secretary and allay any of DoD's fears or concerns. He felt certain everything would turn out okay. He only knows what he's being told by DIA leadership, he said. Jim looked tired and beaten. The last few months had not been kind to him. Jim was a caring and sensitive man who believed he was doing his patriotic duty. Jay and I admired him for that. I asked Jim if he wanted me to attend the meeting with Deputy Secretary Lynn as a show of solidarity. I figured he could use a human shield. Jim told me it would be best if he went alone. And so I acquiesced. Later that afternoon, I ran into Woods in a hallway between meetings. He had come to the Pentagon to receive a briefing on DIA matters not related to our efforts. Unlike my usual interactions with him, Woods didn't smile and looked at me sternly. As he approached, he put his hands in his pockets and said something in a quiet tone that I'll never forget. Lou, you know we already know what these things are, right? I wasn't sure if Woods was asking a question or making a statement. I'm sorry, sir, I said. What are you specifically referring to? I sensed his annoyance. Deep in my mind, I secretly hoped Woods knew something I didn't. I hoped Woods would reveal to me that these UAP we hunted were actually some sort of secret U.S. technology hidden deep within the black budgets of the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, or the Air Force Research Laboratory, AFRL. That would have been a welcome relief. Have you read your Bible lately, Lou? He asked. Sir, I'm familiar with the Bible, I said. What a strange thing to ask, I thought. Lou, you're opening a can of worms, playing with this stuff, Woods said. It was clear to me he was talking about UAP. I can't imagine the look on my face, but I'm sure Woods could tell I was perplexed. It's demonic, he said to me. There is no reason we should be looking into this. We already know what they are and where they come from. They are deceivers, demons. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was a senior intelligence official putting his religious beliefs ahead of national security. It was an intense moment. I know we go way back, Lou, was the subtext. I know you probably once looked up to me. I'm a friend. But I don't always have to be. I was dumbstruck. In a moment, I realized that my mentor, who had always been the consummate gentleman, could be a stone-faced, ruthless operator. No wonder he did so well over at the CIA. This was a direct warning to me, and I completely understood the message. Yes, it's natural to fear the unknown, and a healthy amount of fear can prevent someone from making dumb mistakes. But simply put, this seemed crazy, and about a topic that was already insane enough.
All right, let's bring it back. Wow, that was a lot to ingest. So we've known that a little bit through understanding this channel, through watching this, all the different things we talk about on this, that Lou had the encounter with this Woods character, which is an alias. And I think it gives me a better idea of what was going on, because really this whole thing, let me say it this way. Satan does an amazing work of setting up these things so that they are very difficult situations, because you can see both sides of what's happening here. On one side, Lou is saying, come on, this is him, Jim Lakatsky, and him and his other fellow cohorts that were looking into this in ATIP. We're trying to make sure that we are defending the country, and this is something we don't understand. And we need to look into this further. On the other hand, you have Christians that understand this is something we don't need to touch. We understand this from our worldview, that we don't even need to touch the stars of the heavens as they are seen, these glowing orbs, and that doing terrible things to people. Lou saw this himself. He saw that things were happening in his house. His wife said it had turned the house upside down. I don't know what that means exactly. Probably not physically, but just in the relationship-wise, it caused a lot of trouble for them. Even his neighbors were saying, "Oh, Lou, is this part of your secret stuff you're doing at the Pentagon?" So I think it's really interesting that he still pursued this and was like, "Yeah, we still need to get into this. We need to dive into this further." When all his leadership was saying, "No, don't touch this stuff anymore. We need to get away from this," and he calls them ruthless. Boy, let's get with the program here and understand exactly what was going on behind the scenes. That was the chapter of the book called Angels or Demons, talking about the Collins Elite. I did a little research on this because at the very beginning of that, it talks about several different people that are leaving their job and going to their job, and then it gives an alias of Woods. I am not going to oust DOS, I guess, the person, but I did a little bit of research on this because I wanted to know, okay, who is this guy? I want to have him on my channel. And you can see on this chart, if you can see it, mine is really small, but these are the dates. You can see James Clapper, which was the undersecretary Intel up there. He was from 2007 to 2010. Lou Elizondo worked in his office, and he's in the orange there, and he worked from 2008 to 2017. James Clapper also became Director of National Intelligence, and he worked for that from 2010 to around 2017 as well. And so Woods, which isn't actually his name, was the Christian who Lou Elizondo considers part of the Collins elite that had to leave because he didn't see eye to eye. So he left sometime during 2010 and went to work as the Director of Defense Intelligence Agency. And I was also trying to figure out who Jim Lukaski was, what he did, and Jay, I'm not exactly sure who he was. William J. Lynn, Department Secretary of Defense, he mentions too. There's a couple people it could be. I'm not going to, the reason why that column is black over there is because I didn't want to, put him out on this podcast, because I am trying to contact him. I want to ask him more about how we can do this channel better, and maybe even if they would want to chat a little bit. But it looks like I found the person based on where they should be at certain dates, and we'll go from there. Hopefully, that we pray, I guess, that we can talk to some of these government officials about this topic, because I think it's very important, and I think they will have stuff beyond what Lou is saying that was happening behind the scenes, that we can get a better idea of what's going on here as we do the research and understanding what is happening and what's going to happen in the future. I think they will have some amazing insight. And if you're listening and you're one of those Pentagon officials, man, I would love to talk to you. And you don't have to talk on air. You can be completely anonymous, but please reach out to me. That would be wonderful. Bradley at strangenormal.org. Appreciate it. Let's dig further into this. We have only a little bit left, but it's going to get wild. So that was the analysis of the timeline chart, and I definitely think that these guys were dealing with some spiritual warfare inside the Pentagon during this time. But what he says further about this is that the Vatican already knew about this problem and doesn't have a problem talking about this, and they have all kinds of stuff that they want to say about it.
I got to think that when people are delving into this stuff, they look at ancient scriptures and these different depictions of things, whether it's the Vimanas in the Hindu texts, and whether it's in the Bhagavad Gita. There's all these different stories in Ezekiel in the Bible. There's things that seem to... If I was a person living thousands of years ago and I encountered a flying saucer or encountered some spaceship from another planet, I would probably describe it in a way that they're describing it.
Yeah, I mean,
like just like sort of the Aztecs describe
today's magic
horses.
is tomorrow's technology, right? So I can tell you, when I went to Italy, I spoke to one of the senior, I think it was one of the senior Vatican academics, and he said to me, he says, "Look, the Vatican doesn't have a problem with this topic. This is something, in fact, up into the 1600s, it was heretical to presume or assume that mankind was the only, if you will, incarnation of God, representation of God. It was actually, but in essence, you're putting limitations on the dominion of what God can and can't do.
Right.
And there are these scrolls, in fact, that are in the Vatican archives that discuss, it's a conversation between a Roman soldier and a Roman general, where they describe, there's something called eclipus. Eclipus in Latin means like sun, eclipse, right? It's the shape of the Roman shield. And they talked about these flaming Roman shields in the sky that would follow them from battle space to battle space. And Mr. Jacques Vallée could probably expound much more upon that than I can, but this was just a brief conversation I had with someone there.
Jacques Vallée is very slippery.
Is he?
Very slippery. He don't commit to anything. He looks at you sideways. And
yeah, he did a lot of good stuff. And he's an incredibly smart guy. Great researcher, of just phenomenal, big
he's
brain.
the reason that guy in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. He's the inspiration for the French guy.
I heard that.
Yeah,
I never had the guts to ask him. I figure he gets tired of being heard.
I'm sure. When you're talking to him, you're like, oh, that's the guy.
But there's a lot of. And when you look at what the Vatican is, I mean, really, it's probably the world's oldest, most capable intelligence organization, because they have priests around the world that people will report miracles to, right, or confessions to, and eventually that gets filtered up to the Vatican. So, talk about the world's first CIA and KGB. It was the Vatican, baby. Those guys had it going on, and so no wonder they have all this archival information, and some of it relates to UAP.
Wow. Yeah, it only makes sense that these things, if they're here now, they've probably been visiting us since back when we were on horseback.
Yeah.
And probably quite a bit before then. And maybe that's the scariest thing for people. They might be responsible for us being humans in the first place.
Well, you remember the stories, right, of even Christopher Columbus coming over to the New World. There were some interesting accounts when they were on the water of potentially some sort of UAP interaction.
I did not know that.
Yeah, you can look it up online. This is all open source.
Except that was debunked. We did a whole episode on Christopher Columbus coming over here. He does have. What's interesting about his scrolls and his logs, his ship logs when he was coming over, he did see tiny lights on the horizon while he was coming over to the U.S. The problem was when you put that on a timeline and look at the days in which he was coming over, it puts him right smack, like he is just almost to the Americas, and he starts seeing lights. So bonfires from the natives. That's what they were. If he was in the middle of the ocean and started seeing these things, hey, I don't have a problem with Christopher Columbus seeing orbs, seeing angels, seeing demons on the horizon. Maybe he was being watched, except it just doesn't line up. I hate to burst the bubble, but it is true that what he's saying, that these things, yeah, we're being watched. We're the most amazing show in the universe right now, and I think that because the universe hasn't seen sin before, and so this is quite incredible. But what he says later about this stuff really concerns me, because they really play up the idea of the Vatican knowing everything about this, and we know through our understanding of Bible prophecy, Revelation talks about there will be a worship problem about this, and there will be a leader of this worship problem, and it identifies who that leader is, and I believe that is the Vatican. And so I'm watching carefully the Vatican as they move into this topic as the form of, oh yeah, we've known about this all along, and let me help you out about this, everyone. Come to me, come back to the mother church, as they say. Be very careful, folks, very careful. They have an agenda. They have a huge agenda. What else did he say about this? He goes into a little bit about Bob Lazar. If you don't know who Bob Lazar is, he's a former he's a scientist that was recruited to work for the secret areas in Area 51, whatever it is, S4 down there. And it's long been speculated that he saw some things that he started talking about and that he worked on. And they did this is all speculation, that he did this because they couldn't get military officials because everything was stovepiped. Everything was, you can't talk to you because this is so secretive. So they brought someone in and just rose him to really high levels so that he could work on this because he was a smart guy. And then he just told everything and they got rid of him. And anyway, he said some interesting stuff about this. I want to show you real quick, and it all comes back to the same thing. Watch this.
I got to think that when people are delving into this stuff, they look at ancient scriptures. Again, it makes sense. That was one of the more weird parts of Bob Lazar's story, was that they've always been here and that they view us as containers.
Containers, interesting.
Yeah. And he said there's a very thick document that relates to the implications that it has on religion and like the way they talk about us.
Well, religion calls us vessels, right?
Yeah.
Religious scripture and a lot of different religions refer to humans as vessels. I'm certainly not a religious expert, so I don't want to pontificate here and say something that's inaccurate, but that doesn't surprise me.
Well, I think the term was, I think they were saying vessels for souls.
I'm going to share.
All right, let's pause it right there just for a second. We got to talk about this because this is where the big deception actually comes in. The deception is not, wow, we've been watched for eons and eons and by these creatures that are not human. The government calls NHI, non-human intelligence, that seems to be talking to them. The amazing thing is that the deception comes from these things saying that you don't die. You can be as God, which we've heard previously in Genesis 3. What did the snake, who is absolutely the devil, according to Revelation, calls the devil the snake, and the snake of old is what the term is. But he says that there is that you can be as God and you can live basically forever. What does the Bible actually say about the soul? Because if we are a vessel that contains a soul, how does that work? Let me bring it over to my screen real quick. This is Ezekiel 18. You're going to see me on the side here because this is my preview of what I'm looking at online as I'm talking about this stuff. The soul that sinneth, it shall die. Well, the soul dies. The soul dies. So what in the world? If we're a vessel and the soul is immortal, then that means that sin isn't a problem, because I thought the wages of sin is death. Well, that's not true. What does Revelation say? Well, this is interesting too. And the second angel poured out its vial. This is the second angel. This is Revelation talking about the end of time. Every soul died in the sea. This is about some plagues that are happening. What? The soul died in the sea. Okay, so souls die. Contrary to what most people believe, a soul dies. John 5:28-29. Do not marvel at this, for the hour is coming in which all who are in the graves will hear his voice and come forth. Those who have done good to the resurrection of life, and those who have done evil to the resurrection of condemnation. So what happens here? You, when you die, do not float around and become Casper the Friendly Ghost. You're not chased around by the Ghostbusters. This is a form of mythology that is gotten into Christianity. This is from the New Age. In fact, a lot of people really confuse this. And at the end of time, why this is so important, you got to listen to this. This is so important because at the end of time, and we are already seeing it right now, Satan's going to use this and say, hey, look, your dead mother that died so long ago, she's coming back. She's telling you to do something that is against what the Bible says, but is so important. And they're not going to say it like that. They're not going to say, hey, you want to be evil? Come with us. They're going to be like something innocuous, something that you wouldn't expect because you haven't read your Bible. You don't know if it's wrong to do this, X, Y, Z. But it's at the end of time, and they're going to use emotion. They're going to use your memories. They're going to use every tactic they can. And one of the tactics that, if you believe that you can talk to your dead relatives, that means you're going to go to your dead relatives instead of to God. What does that make them? That makes them your God. That makes, because we should be talking to God about our problems. We shouldn't be finding out our information from these dead entities that are appearing as our dead relatives. That's making them an idol. That's making them in place of God. And that's why it was condemned in early Israel in the Bible as necromancy. So when we're told this, that your soul is a spirit that lives in you, when there's nothing in the Bible that says that the spirit, or the ruach, is actually live, an entity floating around somewhere outside your body, just like this whole remote viewing type thing. You don't exit your body and just float around somewhere. This is a deception. You are you, and you die, and you wait into the grave until the resurrection, because that's what Jesus believed. He told the disciples that. He said, look, Lazarus is dead. He's sleeping. He said, well, if he's sleeping, then go wake him. No. Jesus said to the disciples, Lazarus is dead. Lazarus didn't say, oh, why didn't you bring me out of heaven? Or why didn't you bring me out of purgatory? Why do I want to be back here on sinful earth when I could have been with all my favorite people in heaven? Because people don't go to heaven when they die. People sleep in the grave. It's like a sleep. What do you remember when you sleep? Oh, what happened? How long has it been? That's what you'll remember when you wake. And that's why Paul talks about when you go to sleep, you wake up and you were with the Lord. Not because you're immediately with the Lord, but because that's what you remember. Okay, here's another thing. Have I been on this me the whole time, or am I actually looking at Bible verses? Let's go back. Acts 2:29-34. Men and brethren, Let me speak freely unto you of the patriarch David, that he is both dead and buried. And this would be a perfect time for them to say, wow, he's in heaven. He's in heaven with all our friends up there. What does Job say? If I wait, the grave is my house. I have made my bed in darkness. The grave is his house. He's in bed. He's in the grave. He's not going anywhere. In fact, he goes on and says, so man lieth down and riseth not until the heavens be no more. Shall they not awake, nor shall nor be raised out of sleep. He even goes on to say that that they no longer come to your house. The dead don't come to you. They don't knock on your door. They don't sweep. You don't start smelling smells that your grandma made. These are all deceptions. And this is how all the popular Georges in ufology have come to start researching this stuff, because they had an experience with dead loved ones. We did a whole episode on that. All this ufology has come because of dead relatives. Boy, it's pretty amazing to see prophecy fulfill right now. If you think this is interesting stuff, we do this 24/7. Join us on Patreon, patreon.com/strangenormal. For every little bit helps, but if you want to be part of our private community, we want to talk to you. And so you can join that in Patreon and join us on Discord. And we talk about this all the time through that. So join us, patreon.com/strangenormal. Let's get back into this. This is interesting. The books. He revealed one more thing. He reveals a lot of stuff. We're going to talk about this episode or this book for quite a while on this channel, but I got something pretty amazing coming up next week that we're going to integrate with it, because I went out and physically did something with someone here in the area that I think is pretty important to understand. But let's look at this next clip to find out what he said, because this really floored me. Watch this.
Since the legacy program and the UAP issue really began back in 1947, only some presidents have been briefed by those involved on the basic facts about the situation, but they are not provided with all the details. As Hal mentioned once, and according to some involved in legacy UAP efforts, presidents simply don't have a need to know everything, and they will only temporarily be in their positions. As far as I know, the following U.S. presidents were briefed in some way: Truman, Eisenhower, JFK, LBJ, Carter, Reagan, George H.W. Bush, and Trump. Carter came across as an open-minded, intellectually curious leader, one who matter-of-factly revealed the existence of the psychic Stargate program to the media. Nixon was considered a loose cannon, so he was not taken completely into confidence, but I have reason to believe he was shown images of non-human bodies. I was told Gerald Ford was not briefed, probably because he had too much on his plate picking up the pieces of the Watergate debacle. Maybe the legacy program thought he would tell the world. Hardly a UAP neophyte, however, Ford had grappled with the subject early in his congressional career during the famous 1966 sightings in Michigan. The Ford Presidential Library has since released at least 15 documents related to the notorious Blue Book swamp gas finding, of which Ford remained forever skeptical. As for Reagan, I have reason to believe that the Strategic Defense Initiative, also known as SDI, or nicknamed the Star Wars program, which Reagan championed, was concerned with UAP, not just nukes. Reagan's biographers also described him as fascinated by the topic, and we know that he once suggested to his USSR counterpart, Mikhail Gorbachev, that the US and the USSR should work together in the event of an alien invasion. In a United Nations speech, he said, "Can we and all nations not live in peace? In our obsession with antagonisms of the moment, we often forget how much unites all the members of humanity. Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bond. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us?"
Yeah, we actually covered that, I think, in Starfall. You actually saw them actually saying that at the end of if you haven't seen Starfall, go to starfallmovie.com, watch that YouTube video. It's a 30-minute documentary. It's just amazing, and it's relevant even today. I'm going to update it as soon as I finish building the new studio here. It's been quite a process. The studio will be part studio, part house on my property, and so it's a lot that's going on here right behind the scenes, and I appreciate all you guys waiting patiently, because we're going to get something amazing happening here pretty soon, but it's going to take a sec. And that's all I got for tonight. But there's so much in this book, that I couldn't show it all. Otherwise, this episode would be about 3 hours long, maybe more, because there's just a lot that he talks about. But out of the spiritualism that is happening, it's clear that this is a spiritual war that's happening, not just around us right now, but in the Pentagon. It's starting in leadership. And that's what Revelation 16:13 is all about. These three frogs go to the leaders of the world and to the whole world. So what's next, folks? Well, it could be. This is just a theory. I had a friend of mine come join me at church this last weekend, and he said he thinks, this is a theory. This is a very, very fascinating theory. He said, even though there's only 7 plagues in the Bible, in Revelation, could the first 3 also be a part of this whole thing? And this is why. The first plague was snakes, right? He had the snakes that were on the ground. What is the representation of that in society today? Well, it is the 2 snakes coming around in a circle hospital. There was a major ouchie fauci that happened. This wasn't a plague, but it's interesting to think about. What was the next one? Blood. Could it be climate change? Flood in the rivers? What was the next one? Frogs. Frogs. What do we have in Revelation 16? Frogs. Frogs, which is the spiritualism that's happening right now. Then we have 7 more plagues poured out that Revelation talks about. Could it be? Just could it be? Is it? I don't know. But we have some amazing stuff that's going to be happening. We're watching climate change. We're watching these weird ouchie fauci things that are happening. And we're also watching the 3 frogs. And we're going to be reporting on them as they happen. Because around the world, things are going to start happening faster and faster and faster, I believe, in this decade. Keep watching the skies, because our salvation draws nigh. Let's have a little prayer. Father God, thank you so much for being with us and giving us wisdom as we look to your word for wisdom, not to the wisdom of men, but to through the lens of the Bible, because we want to search this daily for truth. Give me wisdom as I'm on here talking about this stuff, and guide and direct my words as you always do. And I appreciate everything you've already given us. In your name, amen. Folks, this has been Pure Strangeness and Absolute Normalcy. Strange Normal. My name is Bradley. Have a good night.
You're watching Strange Normal, where the truth is the truth.